Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. You guys ever heard that song? You know how the song goes, right? And that is where we are at in this week's, actually probably the next couple of weeks, of Truck Cab Devotionals. Welcome back, everybody, to the Truck Cab Devotional. And we are in this incredibly rich story of a man whom God used, who started off originally known as Abram, whom God changed his name to Abraham, and would eventually go on to birth God's chosen people, Abraham. And it's a story so rich and so full of Jesus that we cannot cover it in a just 5-minute episode in this devotional, right? A man who is blessed to see the pre-incarnate Jesus face to face several times, to see the Christophanies throughout this. And what does that mean, Aaron? That means that Jesus, throughout the whole Abrahamic story, is just riddled throughout this thing. Now, we are covering these different topics of like children's stories, right? And giving a little more depth into what we've learned as children, if those of you who have grown up in church. We see Abraham. God calls Abram, and they come out of the land in which they're living. I'm gonna give it a real quick snapshot. Comes out of the land in which they're living. They separate Abraham and his nephew Lot. He's like, hey, you choose one place to go and I'll go the other. And that's what he does. He comes, the first instance of Jesus in this story that we see is him meeting this Melchizedek, in whom he ends up in turn giving 1/10 of everything he has to him. This Melchizedek has we're not going to get too deep into this, but go research Melchizedek for himself. Of course, the writer of Hebrew goes into Jesus being of the order of Melchizedek. They have no idea where he came from, and yet here we see Abraham meeting him face to face, being blessed by him, and then in turn giving 1/10 of everything, a tithe, to Melchizedek. Anyway, what I'm trying to quickly get to is this first story, and this is all covering in Genesis. For those of you following along, anywhere from chapter 12, and where we're going to end is, in today's episode, is somewhere around 19, right? Through 19, chapter 19. Okay? Because all these stories, what's the next greatest children's story that we've heard of is the Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And we see that God says here, Abraham intercedes for Sodom. So the men turned from there, went towards Sodom, and Abraham stood still before the Lord, and he drew near and said, suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. God has every intention of destroying Sodom and Gomorrah because of the evilness, because of the wickedness that is going on in this city. And Abraham goes into it saying, hey, if there are 50 righteous, would you do such a thing? And God's like, yeah. And Abraham pleads all the way down. If there are for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it, God says. And then for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Abraham he's just pleading, interceding with God. And he's like, okay, hey, if there are at least 10, I will spare it. Then, but there wasn't, right? Sodom is this just evil, wicked place. And God destroys. I've had a heck of a time trying to figure out how I was going to do this episode, because I'm telling you, this story is way bigger than I can do in even just 2-3 episodes, right? Anyway, God ends up destroying it. He ends up saving Lot, right? Abraham goes, gets Lot. Angels come into Sodom, and they lead Lot and his family out. or Lot and his, yeah. Either way, they say, take your wife and your 2 daughters here, unless you be swept away in the punishment of the city. There you have it. So they leave, but here's the thing. Lot's wife turns around and gets turned into a pillar of salt. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, sulfur and fire come out of heaven, and the cities are destroyed. Okay? Where do we see Jesus in this? And I've been thinking about this long and hard, right? We see Jesus in Abraham's intercession for Sodom, right? Jesus is right now, when the enemy, the devil, the accuser, he's accusing us, and yet here we have Jesus in heaven, alive, interceding on our behalf for us. And that is a picture. Abraham is a picture of that, interceding for these wicked folks of Sodom and Gomorrah. That this is where we can see Jesus, because he's doing the same thing for us right now. In our wickedness, as wicked and evil as we are, Jesus is still right there interceding for us to the Father. And then we see Jesus in this story of being rescued out of a wicked, evil world. That, just like Sodom and Gomorrah, we live in that today. We just look around you in the wickedness that we live in, and yet God has sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to save us out of this wickedness. That what we can look forward to is eternal life with Him in some place so much better. But yet, if you look back in that path of striving and following after Jesus, don't you dare look back at that life you left behind, because you will, just like Lot's wife, be turned into a pillar of salt. You will die because of that sin. Looking back and longing for that sin life that you left behind, you run the risk of dying for all eternity. So where do we see Jesus in this? It's Jesus, the path to redemption. And our old life of sin, being left behind in Sodom and Gomorrah, that wicked, evil world that we just left behind, striving after a new life found in Jesus Christ. Boy, I know this was a longer episode, but like I said, it's so tough to do this in short form. You need to go read this for yourselves. It is so awesome, and it's even more so as we get further on in this Abraham story, in how he encounters Christ and how he encounters in just everything. It excites me. The Old Testament, I was just talking to my family today, the Old Testament excites me. I just love it, and because everything points to Jesus. So guys, please go read this. Go see Jesus in all of it. And I hope that this encourages you. And I just love that you guys are just even joining me on this journey. So guys, thanks for watching this week's episode of Truck Cab Devotionals. We'll catch you next time.